All right. Okay. Okay. So yeah, let's do this. Well, I have the pleasure of having Dr. Bruno Heinen, who is an amazing pianist, composer, and he's also a great teacher. He teaches piano, jazz piano and composition at Trinity Laban Conservatoire here in London. And well, Bruno, thanks so much for being here for this
No worries.
chat and for allowing me, I guess, to pick your brains a little bit. We're gonna be talking about a bit about music and composition and etc. etc. So, well, first of all, how are you, and how's your musical life at the moment, and yeah, how's things?
It's good. It's a good moment. I'm really enjoying my teaching at Trinity
Nice.
for a start. So I, for the last few years, been teaching composition to the jazz second years, the undergrads, as well as one-to-one piano and one-to-one composition. And recently started doing some PhD supervision and some examining and auditions and all of that. And from next year, I'm also going to be taking the second years for a course on counterpoint, which is going to be interesting. And then after the Christmas break, I'll be taking the fourth years for string writing. So
wow, within the jazz
within
department.
The jazz, yeah, which is really nice.
It is, yeah,
and quite unique, I think, among jazz departments to have a course on counterpoint and a course on string writing. So I think that's, you know,
I was wondering that. So is it like a course that you designed or that you will be designing?
So I'm in the process of getting stuff together for those two courses. So that should be quite
that's amazing,
fun and quite interesting to start that next year. But I'm really enjoying being there. It's really the perfect fit for me. So that's cool.
Wow, good.
And then yeah, my playing. I mean, playing wise, I'm enjoying the current project I have with the W, my band, with Heidi Vogel and Andrea Di Biase and Jean Calderazzo.
Sure.
It's been a few years we're working together, and we have our first album coming out in January. We had a small EP out last year, a live EP, but our first album coming out in January, and I'm happy with that. And there's some string quartet stuff on that as well. I had strings come in to play on 2 tracks. So
did you arrange some of your music for a string quartet in that context?
So I arranged 2 of my pieces for strings, just sort of subtle string arrangements around what we were doing. So
you're playing together.
Yeah, but much less involved than the changing of the seasons.
Okay, I see.
That we might talk about, but for the written sections of my music with the band, I wrote some contrapuntal string lines and whatever, so that was nice. And yeah, doing some, you know, sideman work in some stuff that I'm happy to be playing a lot with Larry Bartley, a little bit with Dennis Baptiste, with Reem Kelani, who I've been working with for a long time. She hasn't been playing she hasn't been singing for a while for health reasons, but now she's singing again, so we've started to do some stuff. And yeah, it's a good moment. I'm happy.
Wow, great to hear that, and looking forward to hearing the new record that's coming out.
Thank you.
In December. So we definitely we'll do that. Well, basically we already got to one of my. I have a brief sketch of what I wanted to talk about with you, and it's basically we already got there. It's quite clear that you, for your career and for your musical path, you always you always, I have a feeling that composition was always a big deal for you. You could have easily been just a piano player, but it's quite clear from listening to your music that that was a thing that you really cared about, and that played an important role in your musical life. And yeah, I was wondering if that was a conscious choice or if it's just developed naturally through your years of studies or your years of playing.
I think it's a very natural thing for a lot of improvising musicians. I think I mean like the for me, the jazz musicians who tend to really have something to say also have something to say on the page. You know, if we think about Wayne or Coltrane or Herbie, or do you know what I mean? It's like it goes hand in hand. I mean, who was it? Was it? I'm trying to think now. Was it Steve Lacy who was like said improvisation is just composition in real time, right? So you're saying like
Paul Bley, I think.
Paul Bley,
maybe.
sorry.
Yes,
Paul
yeah,
Bley.
sure.
Sorry, Paul Bley was saying like composition is just improvisation in real time, and
yeah,
it just makes perfect sense. I mean, if you're, I kind of want to improvise like a composer and compose like an improviser. Do you know what I mean? It's like it just goes. They're just so linked. Do you know what I mean? I think the musicians that, yeah, I think the musicians that have most to say as an improviser will generally be composers naturally.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you know what I mean? I think it just goes hand in hand. But I did study composition. I mean, I like during my undergrad at the Royal College in classical music, I took composition as an elective every year. So I did study a bit of like formally academically classical composition.
Okay. Okay. So
but
that was both.
Yeah, but it was always natural. I mean, from when I was little, I was always writing.
Yeah.
Things,
okay.
Even if it wasn't in a jazz context or a classical, whatever context, I was always composing stuff.
Okay, that's interesting. So, and also, I guess in your jazz career, have you always been writing your own pieces for your ensembles as well from the very beginning?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the most successful stuff is when I had the people in mind when I was writing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about that. I was gonna ask you if I think it's a bit of a recurring pattern as far as I'm understanding, and in my own experience as well, that plays an important role if you're writing for someone and writing with a sound in mind, with a specific player in mind. And I was wondering, well, I guess you already answered it, that's very important. And I was wondering if that also changes a bit of your approach and of the process if you're writing for someone rather than just writing a good piece for a good soloist.
Definitely. I mean, for example, the two things we've just touched on, like in terms of my own work, like this larger thing for strings, the changing of the seasons, like that context is very much writing for string players and in a classical context who don't improvise, and that has to be presented in a certain way. But even in a jazz setting, like wanting to get the best out of your musicians, like for the band, for my current project, for my band, I don't present any music on the page, so I teach it to them, and we learn it by ear. Nice. And the best stuff tends to be, I get the most out of them when the writing is actually super simple, and there's like loads of space for them to do their thing with it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what I wanted for that band to to sort of collectively see where it goes in each performance, rather than say I want this thing there and this thing there. And sometimes just putting a page in front of someone can already be a restriction, right? Because you see it laid out in a certain way. And
yeah, absolutely. So I guess in this context, yeah, it gets in some contexts it gets detrimental to write too many details in what you or even to write at all, because you prevent things from happening.
I write it down by hand. I like working stuff out on the page and stuff myself, but then when we have a rehearsal or a sound check or whatever, and I'm doing it, I find that just singing lines or playing lines and writing very simply, and there's some more complex stuff, but like I find that the page can sometimes be a barrier. Like, do you know what I mean? Like in performance as well, like you can have a lot more interaction on there's no barrier between the musicians on the stage and the musicians in the audience. So like you can have a lot more eye contact, a lot more be a lot more immediate with the audience without something on the page. So yeah, sometimes, and within the actual writing as well, I find writing something, I find myself writing simpler and simpler things actually in the last few years, but maybe that's just what I'm hearing at the moment.
Yeah, of course. Maybe it could be a phase, and could be as long as it happened naturally, which I believe that's how it happened.
Yeah. But in other bands and in other contexts, I've written very specific things for people, which also can work and can make sense for some people.
Yeah, of course, it depends on the material and on the context.
And it depends on how much time you have with people. I mean, if you're just like, it can be nice to arrive at a gig of someone else and they say, oh, have you got anything with you? And you pull out some charts and you play something of yours, which is a nice thing to be able to do.
Of course.
And some compositions work like that, right? They're compositions that work as a composition. They're not specific to certain people at all. They only work with certain people. And then it's nice to bring them out and play them with different people, and they sound slightly different and they bring their thing to it. But then if you have the luxury of rehearsing regularly with the same people, which I have had in the last couple of years, especially with lockdown, we were playing every week. Do you know what I mean? So then it's much easier to just get rid of all of that and just teach it to the guys by ear, and things develop naturally over time.
Yeah, that's the perfect way of developing the sound of a band, to have a regular thing and to be able to play. Wow. And in terms, let's say, not specifically to this phase of your writing, can you, this is almost an impossible question for everyone, but can you pinpoint a few patterns that maybe you recognize happening when you have to sit down and write a new piece, or let's say the process? I'm sure it's different every time, but maybe you can trace down a few things that happen.
There are, often. And even with this phase, like with all my writing, basically, I always have a starting point.
Okay.
Always.
What's that?
it might be different every time.
Okay.
The starting point might be different, but
Okay,
I like
okay.
to write with it. I like to write with a starting point, and this is how I teach on the course at Trinity as well. I always give my students a starting point.
Well, give me an
So-
example of a starting
So
point.
I find like there's very few times I'll just sit at the piano and play, and something will come out, and that will be the composition. I find
Okay.
the best compositions, I'll have something in mind before I start. So
Wow.
I'm saying, like, if you take the lead of how Bill Evans wrote a lot of his compositions by saying, like, I'm going to write something without dominant chords, right? And then he wrote Time Remembered. I don't know if that's exactly how it happened, but I'm saying this is like,
Could be.
you know, we could look at it that way, or let's write something that explores 2 time signatures, and you have 3/4 ski-doo, or let's look at something which explores 5/4, and you have 5, or let's do something which goes around all keys of Comrade. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
So like that's a very specific, like, a musical starting point. But so I might have something like that in my head and say, I'm going to write something that does this specific thing.
Yeah.
Which will also often be something that I want to shed technically.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
Like, I wanted to really get inside 12, like 12/8.
Yeah.
So I wrote something that, like, does a few different rhythmic things between feeling the 12 and the 3 and the 4. Do you know what I mean? So
yeah, sure.
Then practicing that also helps the playing,
Of
and
course.
it has a clear idea for the piece, underlying idea. And I feel like the best stuff really has a central idea. Like the most successful compositions are really about one thing.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Just one
yeah.
thing.
Yeah, I agree.
So if you have one thing as your starting point,
Yeah.
you're going to make the most successful composition. Now, in terms of what I've done, like, a lot of those starting points have been other people's music.
Okay.
So, like, starting with the Vivaldi, for
Of
example,
course. Yeah.
that's the starting point.
Yeah.
So, like, everything was kind of not derived from that material, but that language was the starting point. I mean, that music was the starting point.
Yeah.
And then, like, actually, no, that's not true. The starting point was the idea behind the piece. So, like, programmatic 4 movements, like, and then paying reference to some of the material within the piece.
Yeah.
So a movement that is kind of, in the impressionist jazz third stream sort of language that I was, like, writing a lot in that and listening to a lot of in that moment.
Yeah.
But about summer or autumn or winter.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So, but that was a very specific brief to start with. It wasn't me sitting at the piano and, do you know what I mean? Or and most of my pieces have a starting point.
Okay, I was wondering if, as a starting point, if a starting point can also be something non-musical, like a literary,
Absolutely.
like a movie, a book, an experience, or whatever.
Absolutely. So I've written pieces that try and capture the atmosphere of a poem, or
or a book. I guess I remember Mr.
Or
Vertigo.
a book, exactly, Mr. Vertigo, and tell that story. Do you know what I mean? So I always
Yeah.
try and I feel like if I have something in mind, or it can be a very simple, like a specific musical thing. I like, I'm really interested in a hook of a Beatles tune. And usually then I'll have that in my head for a while and then try and forget about it and play something like it on the piano, and that will turn into something. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, of course.
So whatever it is, it will usually have some kind of starting point, and this is how I teach composition. So I'll give them a new task every week, which is an excuse to talk about that specific thing.
Yeah.
And at the end, a writing task for the next week.
Yeah.
But the result being as open as possible. So it might be a lesson on Bill Evans, as I said, and then the task will be to write a composition that either has no dominant chords or has two explores 2 time signatures, or whatever it is. Or it could be a lesson on Bach and counterpoint, and then the task will be I'll give them one line of a chorale, and they have to write the other 3.
Harmonize. Yeah, of course.
But in whatever style they want, and then turn that into a composition. Or do you know what I mean? Whatever it is, let's start with something, because the hardest thing can be starting a new composition. And I find that when I don't write with something in mind, it's never as strong as when I do.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, sure. And it's a very pragmatic way of either teaching or approaching, which I think it's effective. I'm sure it is. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's also having a goal and a kind of commission, deadline, whatever you want to call it,
there's nothing
for yourself
like
or for someone else,
Absolutely.
So I wasn't at Stravinsky, so I'd never write anything if I wouldn't have written anything if I hadn't had
of course,
a deadline. And it's like, it's nice if you say, like, you give yourself a deadline. I'm going to write this thing. I'm going to write something by this point or by the next week on this subject or with this starting point. It seems to. Yeah,
it's great. Yeah, I agree. And well, we already started talking about changing of the seasons. Is that is this? Sorry, I got the pop-ups.
No worries.
We have 10 more minutes with this meeting. Was that the first time that you wrote for? It's a chamber ensemble, so it's let's say it's not a massive ensemble, but it's a, let's say, a medium-sized ensemble. Was that the first time that you wrote for such an ensemble?
Yeah. Yeah, that was the first time I'd written for something that big. Well, I'd written a couple of big band pieces at college, but I didn't really know what I was. Yeah, I can't. That don't really count. So yeah, I think this is the first time that I'd seriously written for something a bit bigger.
That's great. Okay, and you mentioned having the Vivaldi material, but then you also, your intention was not to entirely draw from that, and it was more of the aesthetic of the approach of of the seasons and to do your thing with that idea. But there's references to some of the materials, especially in some movements more than in others. Was that did it feel like a chore to have that big?
Yeah, at the very beginning, I was quite daunted when because the Camerata came. They commissioned me to write this thing, and it was quite like, okay, so it's the most famous piece in history.
Pretty much.
Do you know what I mean? What am I gonna? What am I gonna? How can I say something about it and say something interesting that somehow talks about the season? And I think what I did first was read the poetry about
Okay.
each movement. You know that Vivaldi wrote poems on each of the
I didn't
movements.
actually. I didn't.
So he wrote a poem about each season.
Ah, okay.
So I, doing some research, found out that he wrote poetry about each movement, and that was, as we were talking about poetry, so
Yeah.
that was really the starting point for that movement, for those movements, was to read the poetry. And like, for example, the summer,
Yeah.
I seem to remember, I haven't read them in a while, but I seem to remember he's talking about like the baking heat and like scorching. Do you know what I mean? It's not really this like romantic, like
Yeah.
nice summer. It's like something quite like a desert kind of summer. Do you know what I
Wow.
mean?
Yeah.
I'd have to check again, but this is what I seem to remember.
That's very
And I think
interesting.
that was more of the what I was drawing on for that movement,
Uh-huh.
right? With like the um uh harmonics and like really high
Yeah. Yeah.
chords and like
Yeah.
there's loads of space and like quite, do you know what I mean? Rather than like a light, friendly
Yeah.
movement.
Yeah.
So I think that was my really the starting point. I was like, okay, well, I'll just start writing ideas based on each of these poems.
Wow. Which is an amazing idea and a way of not having
Yeah,
not feeling the burden of that heritage.
exactly. And then in like the spring, like I think I paid a nod to
Yeah.
his material a few times.
And in winter as well.
And in winter as well. Yeah, exactly. So there's a few, yeah. So like this repeated string thing, and like I wanted to have some, I pay it
Yeah.
my respects,
Yeah. Yeah.
if
Yeah.
you
Of
will,
course.
to the to the to the Vivaldi, but try and do something myself with
Yeah,
the material.
the impression I got, especially from winter, is that it wasn't easy. It was a very hard thing to achieve, and I think you executed it beautifully, because
Oh, thank you.
you can still, the music is there, the original music is there,
Yeah,
but you've managed to give it, to do your own thing with it.
yeah,
But it's always there, which is important, because it would have been easier to just move away and just do your thing.
yeah.
That struck a pretty perfect balance to my ears in that
Mm-mm-mm.
sense. And also it's a perfect example of this bridge between styles, at least again to my ears, of course, because there's this the ostinato played by the strings, but on top of that you're improvising and you're taking that harmonic language basically everywhere you want, or you can impose your own freedom on top of that, but still without turning it into a different piece altogether.
Mm-mm.
So yeah, that's that stuck. Um, can you do you remember how you approached that particular movement, that winter movement, if you do?
I think with that movement, I was listening a lot to that recording from the album Gershwin's World
By Herbie Hancock,
of
of course.
Herbie,
Yeah.
where he's playing over the Ravel
Second movement.
and
I can see
I
that.
think it's that well, yeah, what you're talking about in terms of balance with the language was also a fine balance with how much I wanted to write for them and how much space I wanted to leave for me in terms of the improvising.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
that's also a hard balance, like how much you write too much and it's like there's no space for anything else, and you write too little and then it's really just a jazz composition, which is not, do you know what I mean? It's like that. I think I was thinking about that quite a lot in that movement.
Yeah.
And then yeah, I think that central melody came quite naturally. And I wanted something quite lush and
and I think the ostinato
full
also
to finish, and the ostinato,
the ostinato gave you a good
that was the
vehicle.
real Winter underlying aspect of that movement, is to pay homage to that.
Exactly.
Yeah, that thing.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. Sorry, I can't.
No,
it's a long time ago.
No, when was that? When did you record this? When did you write the music for this record?
Absolutely. Look, I have to look.
It's all right.
It was a while ago, yeah. But I spent a while writing it. That's for sure. I spent 6 months.
Okay. Yeah.
On the piece.
On the writing. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. And well, thanks so much, Bruno. We were talking about your changing of the seasons work, and we talked about Winter, which is the final movement of the piece. And there's the other movement that really struck my ears and that really caught my attention is Summer. And we already chatted about a little bit about the inspiration you got. It's interesting that you got it from the poem rather than strictly from the musical material. And basically the impression I got from listening to Summer is that the way you've arranged your role and the strings and role, well, firstly, it's very equal and balanced in that sense, which is great. And also, what really stuck in my mind is that you almost don't really understand where the improvised part ends and when the written part starts, and vice versa, because it feels very seamless. And can you go a little bit in detail about the process of that and how you conceived it and how you realized it, how it's written?
I can. Firstly, I can tell you, because I just looked it up, but it's 5 years ago.
Okay.
This project, 2017, and I wrote it the 6 months leading up to
the recording.
2016, 17. We wrote it, and then we rehearsed for the best part of a week.
Okay, that's good.
At the Vortex.
That's great.
Jazz club, and it was recorded there.
So were you all together in the same room with no separation?
We were all together in the same room. I'll answer your question in a second. We're getting slightly off topic.
But, no, it's all right.
But it's interesting to say that it was the first time for them really to, and it's part of your question as well. Part of the answer to your question is that those string players and many classical musicians are used to doing many takes of something and choosing between takes and splicing. But as we know, for the last however long, that's been the norm
of course,
in classical recording. So this was very different for them, right? Because I'm improvising, so we have to do whole movements or at least whole sections.
Yeah, of course.
So that was new for them and quite daunting for some of the string players to know that was going to be a take. Do you know what I mean? So
yeah, sure.
That was interesting for me because it's so normal for us, right? To play a take in the same room and that's it. And so that was interesting. Summer, I really wanted to have some improvisational element between the improvised piano part and the written string parts. I really
Yes.
didn't want it to be them just playing dots and me just improvising.
Yeah.
And the way I wanted to facilitate that in summer was because they really didn't want to have to like improvise. And I was like, well, why don't I build a movement where the entries are improvised?
Yeah.
So there are some sections which are all written, but in summer I wrote a lot of those entries with open bars before and after, which meant that we felt the movement all together. So Charlotte Mackley, the first violinist and leader of the group, would bring the strings in when she felt
so she was leading
right.
them. Yeah.
So she was leading the strings into all of those chords and into those sections.
Yeah.
And in that way, it was kind of like we were all improvising together. We were all playing as one. And she would, and I would, sometimes I was leading them into the next section with what I was playing, and sometimes they were leading me. And I wanted to explore that relationship. Rather than like the strings doing their thing and me improvising over the top for the whole work. Do you know what I mean? That was what I wanted to explore for summer.
Yeah, and in fact, the result is brilliant because it's very seamless. It feels organic to my ears, which I think that was what you were going for. I think.
Yeah, that was what I wanted. Something very organic and natural in terms of that relationship between those different elements.
Brilliant. So what would a string part look like? Did you say that they were just simple bars, but they knew they had just to play that and wait for a cue to the next one?
So I'd have a section or a chord or a few chords in a row written, and then an open bracketed repeat mark with open written on top. So they'd play the section, and it's quite rubato as well. So even within the sections, it's like up to Charlotte to lead those together. But with 13 strings, you all kind of have to feel it together.
Absolutely.
Do you know what I mean? So it was a lovely process of getting that together with them, because they hadn't done that kind of thing before.
Wow. Okay. And this is hard. Don't worry if you don't remember, but do you remember if the take that's on the record is a whole take, or maybe you could have chosen pieces or it's half or whatever?
Take. It's a whole take. I remember that for sure. We did it 2, maybe 3 whole takes, and that's one whole take.
Okay, because the reason I was asking is that it feels like one take.
It is.
Yeah, it feels. Yeah.
That I definitely remember. I think with Spring we might have done up to the solo part.
Yeah, which is
those kind of things. With those the couple of movements we did, like it might be one section from one, but they're whole sections. But that whole long section,
no, of course,
is one take, and then another take for the. Yeah, there were moments where we could splice in a couple of the other movements. I think we did a bit of chopping and changing, not much, maybe just 2 or something like that. But Summer, I remember it was a whole take. It
definitely feels like it. Yeah, which is amazing. I think it contributes to the overall result.
Well, that was kind of, it kind of raises the stakes, right? It's a long movement.
It is
not long, but I mean, in some terms it's
it is.
And sometimes it's a long move. For them, it was a long movement to do in one take and know that it was all going to be one take. Do you know what I mean? So that was it was they were excited by it. It was nice. It was lovely.
Okay. And that's it. On a more general topic, but still related to this. We are talking about improvisation and composition and how these two things can coexist, at least within this genre that we are talking about. Whatever that is, you use the term third stream that was coined by Gunther Schuller, and it's a good way of defining it. And even if it's a broad, let's say it includes a broad spectrum of music that can be considered. But yeah, that's basically what we're talking about. And how would you say your composition approach changes and gets affected by the fact that you know that there's going to be improvisation involved? If it changes, it might not.
Well, I don't think I've ever really written much that hasn't included improvisation in some way.
That's a good
point. Do you know
point.
what I mean? I don't think I've ever. I haven't written anything really.
That's entirely.
Maybe apart from something when I was studying composition at college. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think most of my career has been writing stuff that's going to include improvisation in some way. So I don't know if I could really
no, it's okay.
Answer the question.
No,
do you know what I mean? Because
it's fine. Yeah, it's okay. And how much do you think of the written piece, of the written material, when you are improvising, or when someone is improvising and you give them let's say the task of improvising? How much do you think the bulk of the composition is important to inform the soloist for his choice?
I think that changes with each composition.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? As we were saying, like I find the best composition. Best is the wrong word. I find the most successful compositions are about one thing, right? So, but that thing can dictate the answer to your question.
Yeah.
Right. So, for example, on my album, Mr. Vertigo, I wrote a composition dedicated to Kurtag, where the idea is just playing with two fingers. Right?
Yes.
So that's the whole idea of the piece. That's basically the composition. That's what it's about. It's like limiting yourself to one finger on each hand.
Yeah.
And I did write some written material, but it's so short.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's a great
limitation.
Example. Yeah.
That limitation of having to improvise with just two fingers dictates the kind of response to the written material.
Of course.
And actually, in that specific context piece, I was exploring the fact that like limitations can be liberating in many ways. You know, so the more limitations you have, the actual, you can end up playing something super fresh and surprising because you're not used to playing with just two fingers, right?
Sure.
And we can't go to learned preconceived material that we might normally play with all our fingers. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, of course.
Can you remind me of the question?
No, we were talking about. No, you were actually very, very much on point. We were talking about.
Okay, good.
I promise. we were talking about how much the material itself informs the improvisation and the aesthetic choices, the artistic choices, and
Right.
creative choices. And this
Right.
was a good example. The
Right. So
piece
that's one
itself,
example.
yeah.
So that's one example.
Yeah.
And then if you're, I mean, you write something that's, so that's something that's like, in terms like writing very little with a very specific concept that actually has a lot of possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
And you might end up writing a lot which has a very specific harmonic context,
Yeah.
which has much fewer possibilities.
Yeah.
So I think like, yeah, absolutely, it changes from composition to composition.
Yeah, I always
it depends what you're going for, and it depends what the composition is about. Like
yeah.
my most recent tune composition that I've written is like, how long is it? 16 bars, and it's like 2 8-bar sections that I'm basically looking at, kind of like, was inspired by kind of 70s kind of pop kind of style, rock style of writing, and that's gonna like inform a very different kind of improvisation.
Of course.
Do you know what I'm saying? It's just like,
you're not gonna just blow bebop lines on top of such a composition, because it would be two different worlds.
Exactly. And it very much depends who's playing it. I think like if I gave that to certain people, you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
To get when you're writing specific things for certain people, they sometimes wouldn't work as a composition for anyone.
Yeah, sure. I always think of Monk as the perfect, like the highest example, or one of the highest examples of hearing a piece, and then his improvisation is so incredibly tied to the piece because of his language. That it feels it doesn't feel like someone improvising lines on top of a piece of a lead sheet. It feels like a continuous flow.
Exactly.
That's very hard to achieve. Yeah.
Wow, yeah. And I mean, Monk tunes are some of the hardest tunes to play, really.
Absolutely.
Because like, you know, what are you going to say on the Monk tune? Do you know what I mean? The compositions are so characteristic that to say something interesting with them that's not what Monk was saying with them is very difficult.
Yeah, of course.
But I agree with you, and I think like we shouldn't be thinking of like playing a standard and then play our improvisation and then play the head. I mean, it's like everything. I mean, these are great compositions. Great American Songbook these are great compositions. Fred Hirsch, I remember telling me, you know, like he was saying, I always hated it when someone says, "What should we play?" and someone else says, "Oh, let's play a blues." He's like, "Well, which blues?" Like,
of course,
do you know what I mean? Like,
makes a world of difference.
Mysterioso is very different to Blues on the Corner, which is very different to Now's the Time.
Do you know what I mean?
It's like it's not you don't just play a rhythm changes. It's not like you play a composition, and then you improvise based on lots of parameters that are put forward by the composition, and hopefully you do some development and all the rest of it of that material. Do you know what I mean? That was his whole thing, as well as learning the lyrics, knowing the lyrics to all the tunes you play and all the rest of it, and really getting inside the compositions. And if you really want to play something, and I very much admire that kind of approach to.
Yeah, I just thought that it links back to when you were mentioning the Vivaldi poems, that was the artistic inspiration, which is let's say extra musical, and I remember reading about the lyrics of standards in your PhD about your interviews with Fred Hirsch, and it's a good link between these two things. It's it's great. Well, great. well, you already briefly talked about this, but what's next? You said you have a record coming in December, and
I
what
have a
about what?
record.
Sorry, go
No,
on.
no, go on.
I was gonna ask, let's say, if you have um, any any other plans to write, maybe similarly to the changing of the season, to write for either a classical ensemble or a bigish ensemble or whatever.
Not right now. I mean, I'm really focusing on pushing this project with this quartet that I've got, and want to push that, and do something with that. I have a vague plan at some point to try and put a big band together.
Wow.
I've got a vague idea of organizing some festival type gig, not getting a big band together to rehearse and play regularly or anything, but maybe one gig that facilitates getting everyone there.
Yeah.
And not a very traditional big band. Just the people I would like to play with on whatever instrument. So I wrote down some ideas, and it would end up probably having a couple of drummers, a couple of bass players, a couple of piano players. Do you know what I mean? And then some very unusual combinations of instruments, but just specific personalities that I'd love to work with, kind of thing, and get them all on a stage and write a graphic score of some kind. So something that's very open, and see what happens, record that and put that out. That's something I'd like to do at some point.
That's amazing.
So do you know what I mean? So just, that's one vague idea of something bigger, but it would be a very different kind of project, because it would be, I wouldn't be spending hours writing dots. It would more be some kind of concept that would be maybe take no less time to write, but would be like about getting something interesting out of a large ensemble that's very open, that fits on one page, and it's an hour set kind of thing. So that's a vague idea that I'd love to do in the next few years. But apart from that, it's about like building this project with the W, with my band.
That's amazing. Well, it sounds like a good plan. You should definitely do that at some point.
Yeah, it'd be fun.
It sounds, or it already sounds interesting.
Yeah.
And great.
Let's see. Thank you.
Okay. Well, Bruno, thanks so much for offering your time, and it was a lovely conversation, and very inspirational and useful and interesting and whatever.
Glad.
So yeah.
Thanks for asking.
No worries. And well, see you next time, and thanks so much. I'm gonna stop the recording now. So bye-bye. Thanks so much.
Thank you.